now, but that got you involved, and you've always been involved in this.
Yes, Epilepsy New Zealand helped my mum and I when he was diagnosed, and so I think we did a ride in 2013, the same distance, but we did a lot slower.
Well, there's a live tracker on the website cyclingforepilepsy.com, and so people can follow you. So your body is holding up?
Yes, my body's fine. It's more my stomach. it's struggling to keep down food, but we're experimenting with different sort of fruits and bananas and protein. We'll figure it out.
We're going to keep in touch with you because this is a real effort if you manage to do it, and all the best. You'll be riding into the late hours tonight.
Yes, till we get a break in the next 2 hours for 20 minutes, and then we have a break at 4 in the morning, I think.
Wow.
The guys sort of keep a tab on things. They just keep me riding.
Tim, well, good on them, and all the best to you, and we'll catch up as you go. All power to you, Tim.
Thank you, Jim.
Good luck.
Good luck.
You guys, see you, panelists.
Bye. Tim Chittick on the first day of the big ride for epilepsy, all the way down to Bluff, and he wants to do it in well under 4 days, 10 hours, I think. So we'll see how he does do. Imagine taking a wrong turn on the first day.
Oh, that would be gutting, wouldn't it? Yeah, it really would be.
We said we'd check back with our reporter covering the Oscars today, and she has a live blog on the RNZ site. Charlotte Graham McClay. Good afternoon again, Charlotte. Oh, no. We want to find out where the statues have got to so far, and I think we're on the verge of getting Charlotte, and we've got her back now. Hello, Charlotte.
Hi, Jim.
Now, can you update us, please?
Yes, we've just seen a very emotional performance from Kiala Settle, who is the US woman with New Zealand heritage, who is up for Best Song for This Is Me. We don't know yet whether she's won, but she gave a beautiful performance. We have had the two big writing awards announced since I last spoke to you. Best Adapted Screenplay, which went to James Ivory for Call Me By Your Name at 89. He is now the oldest person to win an Oscar. And Best Original Screenplay, to just a very emotional and responsive audience, went to Jordan Peele for Get Out. It definitely hasn't been lost on people that these are two films, one exploring sexuality and one exploring race. There will be the detractors after the ceremony who say that this was tokenism, that was the only reason those films were given the awards. But I think if people look back in a few years and see whether those films stood the test of time, whether perhaps they were just telling stories that people hadn't got the chance to hear before, I think we'll agree that that was the case.
So that would have been a grand moment with Kiala Settle. That's from The Greatest Showman, in case people aren't quite clear about where that song comes from, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. And as commentators have pointed out, it was a film, The Greatest Showman, that was in pre-production for I think about 7 years. It was considered a bit of a joke at first. It's a Hugh Jackman fronted vehicle, but it's actually garnered really good critical buzz. Audiences have loved it, and that song, This Is Me, is really kind of the one to beat. It's the big kind of show-stopping number and the best song.
All right. Thank you, Charlotte. Big awards still to come, and the live blog on the RNZ site. And the time has run away with us. Andrew Hoggard, lovely to have you debut on the panel.
Morris, thank you for having me.
Oh, pleasure. Come back again. Catherine Robertson, always nice to have you on too.
Thank you. All
right, and that's us for another day. More Oscar news and all the other Checkpoint news right now.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight on Checkpoint they paid $350,000 for a house which will now cost $380,000 to repair. What happens when you buy a home in good faith on the basis it has been EQC fixed? The couple, the lawyers and National Party's new EQC spokesperson Stuart Smith, who says EQC should consider suing Fletcher's for botched repairs. Also tonight, 10 minutes for rehydration management. What is rehydration management? A mother who took the Health Ministry to court demanding to be paid for caring for her severely disabled adult son, rejects its latest offer and the assessments that accompany it. The Prime Minister's whirlwind tour of the Pacific Islands. Ngāti Whātua offers free health care and the very high price of fruit and veg.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. On day one of her Pacific mission, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has announced almost $10 million in funding and says New Zealand is focused on helping the region deal with future challenges, including natural disasters. In her first official meeting with the Samoan Prime Minister, discussions focused heavily on recovery, resilience and climate change. The New Zealand money is to boost employment and help Samoa recover from Cyclone Gita. She told reporters New Zealand is also focused on the future.
The flavour of this Pacific mission, you'll see, heavily focused, yes, on resilience in the wake of major weather events, Cyclone Gita, but also what we can do to advocate collectively with the Pacific on climate change and also invest particularly in young people and women.
Jacinda Ardern speaking from Samoa. Otago University's student law camp has been cancelled after complaints. The student-organised camp, due to run this weekend, came under review because of complaints about past camps involving excessive drinking, nudity and jelly wrestling. Complaints had been coming directly from former students in the wake of the Russell McVeigh scandal. The university's Humanities Pro-Vice-Chancellor met with the leaders of Otago University Law Student Society today about this year's camp. Now it's been announced that the camp has been cancelled. A tourism operator in Golden Bay believes the region will need government help to bounce back after the Cyclone Gita storm closed the Takaka Hill Road. State Highway 60, the main lifeline to the bay, was hit by 16 slips, with 2 sections of road completely washed away. Escorted convoys take people over the Takaka Hill twice a day, and the route is also open during the day on Sundays. But local businesses say they're hurting, with some already having to lay off staff. Tony Bateup of Golden Bay's Kayaks says he's gone from having up to 30 boats out on the water a day to just 1 or 2, and he says locals will need government support to survive.
This is going to have a massive impact on Golden Bay, and to be honest, if we don't get any help from central government, then I don't think we'll have the same Golden Bay as what we've got now in 12 months' time.
Tony Bateup says local business owners will meet tomorrow to discuss issues such as loss of income and when the road will be repaired. The owner of the Flaxmere bar, a man died outside following an attack, does not believe he was a patron. A homicide investigation has been launched after the man was attacked and died outside the Flax Bar and Eatery late last night. The bar is run by the Masterton community-based organisation, the Trust House Group. Its chief executive, Alan Pollard, says they're shocked at the death.
The pub was actually closed. We closed it at 8:30. And really, nothing untoward happened. In fact, it was probably quieter than usual for a Sunday. It's actually quite a shock. I mean, Flaxmere's been doing a lot of good things of late.
Alan Pollard from the Trust House Group. Support groups and help numbers have been made available for those needing help completing their census form. Jonathan Mosen is blind and had problems getting access to the codes needed to fill the forms out. He's calling for an inquiry into this year's census, but the Green Party leader, James Shaw, says help is available.
Someone who isn't able to see but can use a telephone will be able to, ring the contact centre on 0800 census, and they'll be able to respond to any questions. There's also people who are out kind of going around, so people can actually go over and help people to fill in the forms if necessary, and we've been doing that in a number of cases.
The Green Party leader, James Shaw. Census Day is tomorrow. A former midwife faces possible legal action over major failures in the care of a woman who had a stillbirth. The Health and Disability Commissioner, Anthony Hill, says the mother planned a home birth in 2014 with a self-employed community midwife as the lead maternity carer. However, problems at 22 weeks led to a scan and a stillbirth was confirmed. Mr Hill says the midwife should then have sought specialist help, but the woman was allowed to go home. She later delivered what she thought was the placenta, but which included her dead baby. Mr Hill says the midwife's failure to consult and spot the need for emergency services was serious. He says she's no longer practising, but he still referred her for possible disciplinary action. It's 5:04. Sport, a stress fracture in his lower leg has forced Nick Willis to withdraw from the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games, but he says he's been fortunate injury-wise during his career, and his focus now is the World Champs next year and the 2020 Tokyo Olympics.
won 3 Commonwealth medals, a couple of Olympic medals. I've had very few injuries that have held me back the year, so I've had a very good run of it, so I can't really complain.
Nick Willis. It's do or die for the Breakers in Auckland tonight when they take on Melbourne United in Game 2 of their best-of-3 NBL basketball semi-final series. The hosts trail 1-0 following Saturday night's loss in Game 1. The Breakers must snap a 3-game losing streak to United to send the series to a deciding Game 3 in Melbourne on Sunday. The USA have claimed their first ever World Series Sevens tournament win on home soil after crushing Argentina 28-0 in Las Vegas. The All Black Sevens could only manage 5th place after a 17-12 win over Australia. They're in 2nd place overall in the series. And the Warriors veteran Simon Mannering won't be featuring in the side's NRL season opener this Saturday against South Sydney after injuring his shoulder in the pre-season. A scan result has shown the 31-year-old may be out for up to a month. That's the news.
A warrior laid to rest.
The Chatham Islands are about as far away from the horrors and the war in Europe as you could have imagined.
A trade war?
Their whole analysis is harebrained, and end products will definitely rise, so the consumer will be the one that picks up the tab.
New Zealand warns on retaliation.
When countries start to retreat into their own corner, sadly, it sometimes ends in more tensions in the world.
Shots fired. Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy Aspinall, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the project that uses AI chatbots to help those who can't afford a private lawyer seek legal aid. And after 10, Alan Hollinghurst on his 6th novel, a multi-generational story about illicit love and its consequences. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island, apart from Wellington. Mostly fine, however, isolated afternoon and evening showers, mainly inland, some heavy and possibly thundery. For Wellington, cloudy periods, a few showers tomorrow morning, turning to light rain later. Nelson, Bulla and Marlborough, excluding the Kaikoura coast, mostly fine, isolated showers, mainly inland, some heavy and possibly thundering during the afternoons and evenings, showers becoming widespread later tomorrow. Kaikoura coast and Canterbury, fine spells and isolated showers, but widespread rain tomorrow, briefly heavy, easing later. Otago and Southland, also Westland, isolated showers, possibly heavy about eastern Otago this afternoon. Widespread rain spreading from the south tomorrow, then clearing later. For Fiordland, scattered showers spreading north overnight, clearing later tomorrow, and the Chatham Islands mostly cloudy, rain developing tonight, easing to a few showers later tomorrow. It's 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. We will have the latest from the Oscars throughout the programme. We will be, of course, with the Prime Minister in Samoa, but we begin tonight with National's earthquake EQC spokesperson who believes the Earthquake Commission should sue Fletcher Building if there's compelling evidence the contractor was responsible for a large number of post-earthquake repairs in Christchurch that went up to scratch. If that happens, it would be a total departure from previous advice to EQC that the contract they signed with Fletcher's exempted the company from liability for substandard repairs. Stuart Smith will be talking to us later in the program. In fact, we recorded that interview a short time ago, but he was responding to the growing number of Christchurch homeowners who are only discovering now that the homes they thought had been repaired haven't been, or that where the structural repairs were required, cosmetic repairs were done. 7 years after the major earthquake, this isn't only affecting people who've remained in the same homes, it's also affecting many people who've bought homes since, many on the basis of EQC paperwork about the conditions the homes were in. People like young Christchurch woman Nick.
What would be the cost of getting your foundations repaired?
It's been estimate that's come back from our quantity surveyor. The repair on our house is $380,000 and we paid $350 for it.
If you're outside Christchurch and wondering what this is all about, those two figures are a good place to start. This was a young couple getting married, buying their first home, that kind of stuff.
And both of us come from single parent families, so owning a home and being married was something that was important to us.
They found a place. It wasn't a palace, but it could be theirs.
And we were just really excited and really proud that we saved really hard and made sacrifices to be able to get into it.
And this is where the story becomes very particular to Christchurch, because buying a home there since the earthquakes has required a meticulous process of due diligence.
Yes. Being a solicitor, I'm aware of caveat emptor. I'm aware that, there's due diligence that's required. I was confident that we did our due diligence. I asked for the scope of works.
And that's crucial, because the scope of works is EQC's assessment of earthquake damage to a property. And in case after case now coming to light, what the EQC documents told homeowners and home buyers was wrong. We'll go back to Nick and her home shortly, but first a question for Christchurch barrister Richard Johnston. Are you seeing very explicitly people who bought homes in good faith on the basis of EQC scoping, which said this work had to be done, and the work was done, but the scope itself in the first instance was manifestly inadequate?
Yes.
And that yes is central to what's now happening in some of these cases. EQC, in their scopes, assessed some damage. That damage was indeed repaired, but major structural damage, usually under the floor, wasn't noticed, wasn't recorded, wasn't repaired, and was then on-sold with the house.
The vendor sold in good faith. The purchaser bought in good faith.
Like Nick, the first-time homebuyer we met before.
I asked for the scope of works. The real estate agent said that all the repairs had been done on the house. It was EQC fixed, was how it was sold to us.
What did you believe about the foundations on the home you were buying on the basis of what the EQC documentation was telling you?
We believed that the new foundations had gone in, and we were told that it was a jack impact foundation and that it was suitable. It was a suitable repair for the property, and that it was fine.
And was it fine?
No.
No. More on that in a moment. Nick is now taking legal action. Last week we spoke to another Christchurch lawyer, Peter Woods. He's just settled a case in which the EQC scope recorded cosmetic damage.
Originally, EQC assessed the damage and they did about $50,000 worth of repairs to the house, mainly cosmetic. Well, in fact, all cosmetic, as it turns out. We got that over cap last year, and the insurer has paid out on a full replacement basis for a new house.
How much money are we talking about?
$600,000.
And the original was?
50.
Underscoped, not scoped, and more. Richard Johnston is representing a client whose structural damage was scoped. He has the paperwork saying the work was done, but it wasn't.
And in that case, in fact, some earthquake repairs to the foundations were scoped for, but the builder did not carry them out by agreement with the EQC officer during the course of the works. So the documents that were on the EQC file said foundation repairs were carried out. They weren't, in fact.
And neither the vendor nor the purchaser knew that. The EQC documents said the opposite.
Turns out that the repairs that were provided for, scoped for, were not in fact done. We now know when an engineer became involved, the first time an engineer had looked at the property, that in fact the whole foundations needed to be replaced. So the house is almost a rebuild.
Richard, can I, just for people who live outside Christchurch, can I just be very explicit about this? So the scope said foundation work needed to be done. The owners were told the foundation work had been done, but it hadn't in fact been done.
Yes.
How on earth does that happen?
I cannot answer that. Yes. I just don't know.
Nor does Nick. She's just confused. Checkpoint has obtained documents which show that in June 2012, EQC's scope of work stated the ring foundation and foundation piles of the house she would later buy needed to be replaced. But on the very same day, that scope changed. The 4-page handwritten scope, written on site, stated the ring foundation was to be epoxy crack repaired and only 10 piles underneath the lounge, dining room and bedroom were now to be replaced. Still, Nick has paperwork dated April 2015 from Fletcher Construction to the contractor who carried out the foundation work. It says, and I quote, "I attended with EQC in this case, and we were largely impressed with the quality of repairs completed. Nick saw that and believed him. And then another shake came, and the fridge was suddenly on such a slope that when the door was open, the veggie bin rolled out and hit the floor."
And that's when we paid $3,000 for our first report to have someone look at the foundations, and that was when it all came to light.
And when you say all came to light, what was the all that came to light?
So our house had bowed, and the middle had stayed true. And instead of lifting the outside of the house up to be level with the middle, they went through and smashed out the pre-stressed concrete piles that went down 2.5 metres, so it dropped to the outside. And they were sitting on these this jack and pack foundation, which sits only a couple of mil into the ground. And because we're sitting on peat and all sorts, it's kind of moving. So when our dog runs up and down the house, the house moves.
And who did this?
That was the EQC.
So are you sure about that?
Yes, yeah. So we did an Official Information Act request on the property, and originally the scope was to fix it correctly, to bring the outside of the house up to the bit that had stayed true, to do a proper fix. But that was over cap, so that was over 115,000 plus just. And then it came to light that a couple of months later someone came on site and said, "Oh, we've got this new cheaper way of doing it. We'll just do this jack and pack. We'll go through and cut those piles out, drop it down to the outside. Job, should be sweet as." And so it went from being over 115,000 to, I think, a $52,000 repair down to a $47,000 repair. And we've got photos where the bearer underneath the house doesn't even sit on a pile. The nails aren't connected, and it looks like a third form woodwork project.
Which, in much less poetic terms, was the kind of thing MB was surveying in 2015.
A report by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment has highlighted some issues with underfloor repairs carried out in Canterbury.
That's former EQC CEO Ian Simpson speaking in an EQC video. In another video, while claiming EQC were on top of things, or would be, Ian Simpson added,
"However, they have found an issue with a specific type of repair called jack and pack."
The MB report was released in August 2015. Then the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment responded to
concerns about the quality of the repair work carried out through the Canterbury home repair programs
with their own survey. 101 homes were randomly selected and 90 of them had completed structural repairs. This from that MB report.
The main finding of the survey is that 32 of the 90 survey homes that had structural repair work carried out were non-compliant with the building code.
How many homes in total had structural work that was non-compliant? Well, the EQC CEO was asked a similar question in 2015, scripted into their video response to the MB report.
How many home repairs do you think were affected, and how long will it take to fix it?
Hard to gauge at this stage.
Some are only now being discovered. If people elsewhere in New Zealand wonder why some people in Christchurch don't move on from the earthquakes, it's that the earthquakes themselves and the damage to their homes they're only now discovering in some cases won't let them. Peter Woods, lawyer.
They trusted that the damage would be assessed properly and the work would be done properly, but as time has gone on and more people have investigated it, they just realised they misplaced their trust in EQC.
Richard Johnston, lawyer.
I've spoken to quite a few real estate agents and putting information together to support the cases I'm running, and they have a genuine fear about the implications of this.
Not just for Christchurch, but for wherever earthquakes and natural disasters may happen. Richard Johnston says the scopes of the problem and the frantic bid to get as many done as possible in the period after the earthquakes. An EQC's own annual report tells us 182,000 rapid assessments were completed in just 2 months. Some of the people doing them, well, Homeowners have told Checkpoint a former vacuum cleaner salesman, a retired headmaster, a garden tools distributor and former police officers assessed the damage to their homes.
The problem has been that those preliminary investigations often form the basis for works carried out by EQC, and the damage has not been properly investigated for foundations that should have involved engineers and a building consent.
Nick, the first home buyer, is now pursuing EQC in the district court. The home they believed, because EQC papers had told them so, had had the work done.
The repair on our house is $380,000, and we paid $350 for it.
Peter Woods now has 200 such cases, or variations of them. Nick is not one of them, by the way. She's with another lawyer. Richard Johnston isn't representing Nick either. He's got yet another group of clients. Is this a scandal?
It's an ongoing nightmare, definitely.
That's Richard Johnston, who's acting for some of the clients. In fact, there are a lot of cases now heading towards the court or towards formal mediation. A couple of people have texted in and said, why didn't they get a building report? Independent builders report. In fact, Nick did indeed do that, but the independent building inspector seems not to have gone under the house and relied instead on EQC's advice that the foundations had been adequately dealt with. National's new EQC spokesperson is Stuart Smith. He points out this was an unprecedented event and it was inevitable that not all claims would be resolved immediately or accurately. We'll hear more from him after 6. But here's part of that interview where Stuart Smith tells us where he thinks the liability should lie if repeated examples of Fletcher Building doing substandard work can be persuasively established.
Now, the liability will lie with Fletcher's and how they recover that from their contractors. If they do that will be over to them.
The liability doesn't lie with Fletcher's though, does it? Because Fletcher's wouldn't actually take on the role of effectively managing the Canterbury home repair program if the liability lay with them.
Well, I believe it does. That's my understanding. So EQC had an arrangement with for the managed repairs through Fletcher's. And so they hired them to do work. If it's not up to standard and didn't meet what was paid for, then there's recourse through the courts for that.
I'm looking at the Auditor General's report that says none of the bidders for the project management services were willing to accept liability for substandard repair work. In other words, actually, ultimately, the buck stops with EQC in contractual terms.
Yeah, well, look, I'm not a lawyer. I assume that this will end up in court, and those things will be sorted out in the courts. But if you contract anyone to do something and they don't meet their contractual obligation, then whether they've accepted liability or not, the courts will assign liability and recover the costs.
So if it becomes apparent that there is an enormous amount of substandard repair work, a problematic amount of it, would you expect EQC to pursue Fletcher's in court?
Absolutely.
That's Stuart Smith, National's new EQC spokesperson. That seems to be a radical departure from National's position while they were in government. We'll explore that more. We'll have more from Stuart Smith on the big picture too after 6. Fletcher's have yet to respond today to requests for an interview, but last week referred us to EQC. EQC CEO Sid Miller has agreed to be interviewed on Checkpoint on Thursday night. 5:23. New Zealand has given nearly $10 million to help Samoa tackle climate change and boost its economy in the first stop of Jacinda Ardern's inaugural visit to the Pacific as Prime Minister. It's part of the government's so-called Pacific reset of foreign policy, which comes amid concerns about China's growing influence in the region. Ms Ardern, Foreign Minister Winston Peters and a delegation of business leaders and MPs arrived in Samoa today, starting off the annual Pacific mission trip. Our political reporter, May Heron, is also there.
A sudden downpour in Apia sent the media and delegations scrambling, though it stopped just in time for Jacinda Ardern to inspect the Guard of Honour. It was a smooth start to her whirlwind Pacific mission trip, where she has the task of building relationships with a country that is now receiving money from all parts of the world. Ms Ardern has spent a lot of time in the Pacific, though this is only her second time in Samoa.
I've been called a daughter of Niue
Please don't take that personally. And anyway, you can be the daughter of many places.
In her first official meeting with the Samoan Prime Minister, Tuila Ipa Sailili, discussions focused heavily on cyclone recovery, resilience and climate change. Ms Ardern pledged more money to help the country clean up after Cyclone Gita, in particular to clear up an unprecedented landslide.
The extra geotechnical work that needed to be done, work on infrastructure, so our hope is that as you identify those needs, that additional $3 million will go in some way to helping with the recovery and building resilience.
The Prime Minister said help also needed to come in a wider form.
We know we need to do our part, but collectively I think we have a role to play in advocating on behalf of the Pacific together in an international forum as well.
Ofira Fa'asu grew up in Moata, a small village on the seaside. There, climate change is very real. She says parts of a walkway connecting the village to the main road now sit underwater, and in high tide, the village is effectively cut off.
It's very heartbreaking because this is where our parents grew up, and then us. And they've worked their whole lives to try and sustain our village, and now the responsibility is in our hands.
She wants New Zealand to invest more.
Make it easy for communities to go and tap into resources, financial resources, and also technical expertise, because villages don't have access to that.
Jacinda Ardern says the Pacific trip will be about asking different countries about the best ways to support them as concerns around climate change grow. While New Zealand is figuring out the best way to help in that area, questions were also asked today about China's influence in Samoa. China has loaned Samoa tens of millions of dollars to build a new airport, hospital and various sporting grounds. The Samoan Prime Minister dodged answering multiple questions about China's influence and would not go into any details, particularly around the size of the country's debt.
I'm sorry, I cannot give you now. I'm not the Minister of Finance anymore, and I'm getting old.
Foreign Minister Winston Peters has voiced concerns about the Pacific attracting an increasing number of external actors, widely seen as a reference to China's growing influence. Today he chose not to criticise other countries for putting money into the Pacific, but instead reiterated New Zealand's role.
We are the cousins of people here, all the way to Hawaii. It's in our DNA, it's a fact. And we intend to ensure that they understand that more powerfully than ever before.
New Zealand also pledged to contribute $6.5 million to boost employment and invest in small businesses in Samoa. Jacinda Ardern will visit Niue tomorrow, where her father is New Zealand's High Commissioner. From Apia for Checkpoint, May Heron.
Auckland iwi Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei is taking the health of its people into its own hands by providing free universal private health insurance for its 4,000 members. The iwi, which has a commercial portfolio of more than $1 billion, wants to lift Maori health statistics by improving its people's well-being. Joining the scheme is free for registered members of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei who live in New Zealand. Here's Te Mana Korehi reporter John Boynton with the details.
Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei iwi member Sauan Te Ua says she has elderly members of her whānau who are being let down by the public health system.
For kaumātua who have hip problems, who, have sore legs and things like that, just that kind of stuff. So, they're having to wait much longer to address their health.
In an effort to provide better health pathways for its iwi, Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei has teamed up with the private health and medical insurance provider NIB. Under the NIB insurance scheme, iwi members will have quicker access to private hospitals and help with the cost of non-urgent medical procedures. Sauan Te Ua says she's had positive feedback from kaumātua who have already signed up.
It's just cool to see them be able to, they kind of just radiate a lot of happiness in regards to their health because it's not too heavy of a burden anymore.
And she knows young families will also benefit.
If you have large families and, your child might need to go see a surgeon or something, you don't have that, massive burden of having the costing weighing you down and things like that.
The hapu currently has 4,000 members and it is expected 70% of members will sign up. If all 4,000 members sign up for the insurance, it will mark a $3 million investment for the iwi. Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei chairperson Marama Royal knows all too well the overrepresentation of Maori in negative health statistics. She says the Auckland health system is at breaking point, so the hapu has taken its own stand.
We wanted to ensure that we were improving the health and well-being of our whānau, right from our babies through to our kaumātua.
However, the public health system, Marama Royal says, still has a major role to play in providing health services.
We want our whānau to be well, we want our whānau to be living longer, and we want our whānau to be looked after. This is not about snubbing any of the public health system. This is about giving opportunity to our whānau.
The insurance package will cover specialist and day-to-day medical costs such as GP, dentist and physio visits. It also fully subsidises a base level of hospital and surgical cover, and the excess is also covered by the iwi. NIB Chief Executive Rob Hennon says he can see the model being embraced by iwi around the country.
There is a really strong desire with business in New Zealand to be working with Maori. This example, while it's the first of its kind in New Zealand, I'm sure there will be many others to follow.
In the next 3 weeks, the hapu will present the insurance scheme to hapu members from Kaitaia to Christchurch. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko John Boynton aho.
Coming up on Checkpoint, the latest from the Oscars. Tākeka business owners call for government support after Cyclone Gita closed the main route to Golden Bay, forcing many tourists to cancel their visits. 10 minutes for rehydration management. A mother who took the health ministry to court demanding to be paid for caring full-time for her significantly disabled son rejects its latest offer of paying her for only 37 hours a week. And the minute-by-minute assessments that accompany it. Wet and humid weather drives up the price of veggies. Why cauliflower will now set you back $10. Giles Beckford with us in the flesh tonight, which is very exciting, and much more before 6 o'clock. Would love your feedback. Don't forget you can text us on 2101. Lots of you already are about Christchurch. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Coming up to 28 minutes to 6, which is a perfect time to go to Katrina with the headlines.
Otago University's student law camp has been cancelled following a meeting between the Humanities Pro-Vice-Chancellor and the leaders of the Law Student Society. The student-organised camp, due to run this weekend, was under review because of complaints about past camps involving excessive drinking, nudity and jelly wrestling. The complaints had been made directly by former students in the wake of the Russell McVeigh scandal. The Prime Minister has announced almost $10 million in funding for Samoa on the first day of her Pacific mission. The money is to boost employment and help Samoa recover from Cyclone Gita. In today's meeting with the Samoan Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern said their talks focused heavily on recovery, resilience and climate change. Ms Ardern says New Zealand is focused on helping the Pacific deal with natural disasters and other future challenges. Jordan Williams' defamation case against the former Conservative Party leader Colin Craig is going back to court, but it won't be a full retrial. In a judgment issued today, the Court of Appeal has reinstated a High Court jury's verdict that Mr Craig defamed Mr Williams at a news conference and in a leaflet in July 2015. The retrial will be on the amount the jury awarded Mr Williams in damages, which was the highest ever amount in New Zealand defamation case. But the Court of Appeal agreed that the almost $1.3 million was excessive and must be set aside. The Green Party leader James Shaw says support groups and help numbers have been made available for people needing help completing their census form. Jonathan Mosen is blind and had problems getting access to the codes needed to fill the forms out. He's calling for an inquiry into this year's census. And Guillermo del Toro has won Best Director at the Oscars for The Shape of Water, his first win. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Giles Beckford joins us in the Auckland studio. Welcome, Giles.
Thank you, John.
Normally beaming in from Wellington, but this is what RNZ Plus will be like. You'll just transmogrify all around the place.
As you know, I just morphed through the studio and I was here like Doctor Who or Star Trek or whatever it is that drops them in.
This is the future we're looking at, Giles.
And we're happy for it. We're happy to provide it for our listeners and viewers.
Excellent. The big business news today, and it really is quite big, is the move by the founder and chief executive of software company Xero, Rod Drury.
Indeed it is. There aren't many people, I think, that we could honestly say this is a big business visionary. Right? And Rod Drury's contribution goes back nearly 15 years or so, when he had the notion that we could create here in New Zealand a company doing software development, accounting software as it was, and we could build it into a multinational force. And that's precisely what he's done in that time.
Can you remind me what people thought at the time? Did people think...
They thought he was a lunatic.
Right.
They thought, nice man, right, really energised about it all, but, well, we're not sure what's going on. I mean, this is the sort of thing they do in Silicon Valley, and it's Rod Drury and Xero. What sort of name is that? Xero. It's not Microsoft, is it? And so he had some difficulties in getting things going, but he got enough people around him. And one of his qualities has been over the years an enthusiasm and an ability to engender confidence in people to back his ideas and to back them financially. And that's precisely what's happened. And to give him its due, he's now created a company which is a powerhouse in New Zealand and Australia, increasingly a powerhouse in Britain. It's spreading its tentacles significantly into the United States and Europe. And he's built it basically from his ideas and his energy and his drive. And he is a big picture man. And that's one thing I've always liked about Rod Drury, is that when you talk to him, he doesn't sit there and bore you endlessly about the minutiae of the programming and the coding and the rest of it. He says, I have a big idea for making communities better. And he's just happy to talk about how he could, in fact, try and improve society as much as he's going to drive his business.
And so he is so associated with the business, but what's he's announced today that he's off?
He's going to leave rather abruptly. I mean, I don't think it's a real surprise. There were a few signs last year. For instance, he had to sell down 3 million shares just ahead of the company's move to the Australian Stock Exchange. That helped to improve the liquidity, the number of shares that would be in circulation. And certainly he had been slowly stepping back. I mean, I had quite a long chat with him at one stage last year, and he said, "Oh, I'm still sticking with the company, but in due course, I think I'll be looking at the broader things, the broader issues about where the company might go, where it might develop, not necessarily about the ins and outs of this particular product and this particular market." And I mean, I don't know whether there are some personal circumstances involved. There's some talk that there might be, but the issue is essentially the company needs to step up now to the next level, right? It's a $4 or $5 billion company. It's now based in Australia. It's now looking to get significantly into other big markets around the world. The Steve Jobs of this world, the Bill Gateses of this world, they didn't actually just sit there day in, day out at their desk ticking the expense claims. Right? They went there, they had an idea, and they got other people to do the day-to-day stuff. And I think this is where Drury's going. Right? And he's now put into the hands of a man, Steve Vamos, who's going to be the new chief executive from the 1st of April. And he's going to be the one to take the company, as they say, to the next level. And he's a man who's had experience with Apple, Microsoft in New Zealand and this part of the world. He's a director of Fletcher Building and a couple of other companies. So he has some notion there of the day-to-day challenges that there are.
That's the truth.
Just the truth. Yeah. So it will be an interesting time. We'll see how the market wasn't that enthused. It's always a big shock when the big name moves. And so the market, it priced down Xero shares by close to 4% today, but they'll bounce back, and we'll see how the company goes. Whether they're quite as high profile as they have been in the past, whether Rod Drury quietly morphs into some other activities in due course, we'll wait and see.
Thanks so much, Charles. What else do the markets do today?
A bit of a ho-hum day really for our top 50 index, down 9 points, 82.80 was the close. No excitement. And on the currency front, we're steady, 72.2 US cents, 93.1 Australian.
Giles Beckford, our business editor, with us here in person. Thank you, Giles. Let's go to the weather now in Wellington with Met-Service meteorologist John Law. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora. It's another very mild night again across the North Line. Temperatures back down to around about 17, 18 for the likes of, say, Auckland. But as we head in towards tomorrow for Tuesday, we'll find perhaps some fine spells, an isolated shower or two as we go through daytime for Auckland and Northland. Top temperatures around about 26 degrees Celsius. Elsewhere on the North Island, we'll find areas of cloud to watch out for. There's still some showers set to spring up through the daytime. It could be one or two heavy and perhaps thundery ones out towards those more eastern parts of the region. And we will find more cloud moving northwards as we go through daytime, reaching in towards Wellington through the afternoon, bringing with it some showers or perhaps even some longer spells of rain by the end of the day. Down that eastern side of the country, we'll keep an eye on those showers forming over the ranges of Hawke's Bay and Gisborne. Some of those sliding a bit closer towards the likes of Napier later on. Highs there, 26 degrees Celsius. Similar story down towards Marston. A bit more cloud through the afternoon. Rain spreads northwards on the South Island, and it does become a little bit heavier for a time across the likes of, say, Christchurch. We are going to find a clearance, though, as that rain moves northwards from the likes of, say, Dunedin and Invercargill. So getting better through the daytime down there, but with temperatures a little bit cooler. We're going to find our nighttime lows back to about 11 degrees Celsius for Queenstown, and our highs back to around about 16 or 17 degrees Celsius. And that's it from me.
Thanks, John. There's some autumnal highs there. Tākeka businesses say they have empty cafes and motels, and everyone is hurting after Cyclone Gita closed the main route to Golden Bay. State Highway 60 sustained major damage, with 16 slips and 2 sections of road completely washed away. And while the route's reopened to daily convoys, Katie Gossett reports locals are still doing it hard 2 weeks on.
At this time of the year, Gary Reeves should be rushed off his feet. Instead, the manager of Golden Bay Motel says cancellations have been coming thick and fast.
Might as well not have been here, really, like we were empty. So the cancellations there really affected us. But fingers crossed, our bookings from March really are looking where they should be. But people are ringing up every day trying to get updates on the phone. So we really don't know if these bookings will last.
Down the street, the part owner of the Brigand Cafe and Bar, Michelle George, has already had to lay off staff.
2 so far, and I've got another 2 that I'm struggling to find hours for. I'm trying to be fair and giving everybody a little bit, but it's really hard.
Meanwhile, at Tata Beach, Tony Bateup of Golden Bay Kayaks has gone from having up to 30 boats out in the water each day to just 1 or 2.
We've got 3 staff members still contracted with us until the end of April, and we're really reluctant to let them go because, in case the road does open, and then we've got no staff to do the job we need. But, we can't keep them on. There's no money coming in, obviously, either. So we're in a bit of limbo.
Local business owners will meet in Takaka tomorrow evening to discuss issues like loss of income and insurance interruption, and Tony Bateup wants to get some certainty about the road repairs so he can make staffing decisions. He says the local transport firm Solly's has just raised its freight costs into the town, and he fears the road closure will also impact on the wider community. But the firm's managing director, Merv Solly, says he's worked closely with meat and fertiliser companies to hold feed and stock movement costs at existing levels, and it's only general freight that will cost more.
We've increased the rate on those 60%, but you have to be aware that we actually, by not pulling the trailer, which would normally carry 20 tonnes, we're having to traverse the hill with just 11, so you can see the cost is just phenomenal.
Tony Bateup believes that long-term, the community will need central government help.
This is going to have a massive impact on Golden Bay, and to be honest, if we don't get any help from central government, then I don't think we'll have the same Golden Bay as what we've got now in 12 months' time.
As for the road, it's currently open to escorted convoys twice a day at 7 a.m. and 5 p.m, and for most of the day on Sundays. And Frank Porter from the New Zealand Transport Agency says the convoys have been getting longer, with more than 100 vehicles travelling at a time. He says he'll be meeting with local businesses at tomorrow's meeting.
We want to just understand how we can work better with that Golden Bay community and see if we can improve their access. We're also talking with the road transport people and trying to work to a wee program to be able to get longer vehicles over the route. So each day we're getting that route in a better situation.
But Frank Porter is warning that access will still be restricted for some months, and he's urging motorists to be patient and arrive on time for the convoys. For Checkpoint, Katie Gossett.
A mother who took health officials to court demanding to be paid for caring for her disabled adult son says the Crown's offer of higher compensation is still not good enough. Diane Moody, who's 76, has cared for her significantly disabled son Shane Chamberlain for most of his 51 years. Mrs Moody rejected an offer to pay her for 17 hours a week at the minimum wage and took the Ministry of Health to court, seeking the maximum of 40 hours a week. In the revised offer, her paid hours would be 37 a week. But what infuriates Mrs Moody is Shane's regular needs assessments. Shane, who has the mental age of a toddler, requires full-time care and constant attention. But Diane, his mama, only gets paid for the time she spends on specific tasks and not for his overall supervision. That means needs assessments based on time. Our producer Bridget Burke called Diane to compare the calculations with, well, the daily reality.
This is the reassessment of Shane Chamberlain dated 28th of February 2018.
personal care tasks and the minutes allocated per day. So let's begin with getting out of bed, 5 minutes per day.
Shane, of course, can get out of bed himself.
Early waking with reflux, cramp, pain, 8.6 minutes per day.
8.6. Well, Shane could wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning if he had a real bad bout of reflux. He could be vomiting, he could maybe not catch his breath. This could go on for an hour, a little longer than that some days.
Bathing and showering, 15 minutes per day. What help does Shane need during that process of bathing and showering?
Well, he can take his clothes off and get in the shower, wash his hair. I have to wash his body, the whole works.
Dressing, 35 minutes per day.
Well, this is interesting because they've actually got here assisting with dressing. They seem to have the idea that Shane can sort of half-dress himself. He can't. It's not assisting with dressing. It is completely dressing Shane. You know, Shane has to be dressed.
Grooming, you've been given 15 minutes. This is a long list of things. It includes shaving, cleaning his teeth, applying cream for Shane's skin conditions, all his other personal hygiene and grooming tasks such as nail cutting, helping him to clean his nose. And this is averaged at 15 minutes per day.
If I gave Shane a cotton bud to clean his nose, I mean, he wouldn't have a clue how to clean his nose. So I have to do all that. And, you know, applying Shane cream and everything to Shane.
How long does it take to shave him?
Well, I always do a wet shave with him in the morning because he just doesn't, he reacts his skin with a electric shaver. So, you know, you have to get the shaving cream out and the blades and off you go. So, you know, it certainly doesn't do it in 5 minutes.
Toileting, including transfers if required and or continence support, 10 minutes per day.
Oh, well, we were in a really tricky situation this morning because Shane had already used up his 10 minutes before lunchtime. He had had a bit of an accident this morning, so I said to Shane, if you want to go to the toilet again today, love, you're stiff out of luck because you've already used your 10 minutes up. So I don't know what we're going to do, you know.
Feeding, eating, hydration. 70 minutes per day.
Well, they've got there that Shane can make his own drinks. Shane has never, ever been able to make his own drinks. I would never trust Shane to lift up a hot kettle. Well, he wouldn't be able to, full stop. His hands wouldn't allow him to do that. And what is it? And time allocate. Oh, and what, 10 minutes? 10 minutes a day for hydration management. I mean, where would you even come up with the word hydration management? I mean, where do they find it?
Have you started speeding up the way you make his drinks to get the right amount of drinks in that time allowed?
Well, I think I might have to really study this and do that, mightn't I?
Meal preparation, 8.58 minutes per day.
I'm sorry I'm laughing, but I just cannot believe that somebody has actually done this. Yeah, it's just mind-boggling, absolutely mind-boggling. That, you know, somebody can work out to the... It's actually not funny, really, but, you know, for somebody to work out 8.58 minutes, I mean, really, just sheer madness.
That's Diane Moody, Shane's mum, talking to our producer Bridget Burke. More strong aftershocks have rocked Papua New Guinea's highlands a week after a magnitude 7.5 earthquake killed dozens of people. This morning, a magnitude 6 tremor rattled Hela province and may have caused further death and destruction. A week after the initial quake, help is still to reach many of the areas cut off by last Monday's quake. RNZ Pacific's Jamie Tahana reports.
The Hela and Southern Highlands provinces have borne the brunt of the Earth's fury, with about 145,000 people in the immediate area affected. The relief effort in the remote, bush-clad hilly region has been hampered by hundreds of landslides, which, in some cases, have buried entire villages and dammed rivers. The Red Cross estimates the death toll at about 80 so far, but teams are still to reach some cut-off areas. The Administrator of Southern Highlands Province, Thomas Elu, says there are 35 confirmed deaths there, but that number will climb.
There are quite a number of people that could be still buried underground at the moment, and despite our efforts to try and retrieve the bodies, it's quite difficult because of the magnitude of the landslips that have occurred.
In Hela, the province closest to the epicentre, the Governor says the region remains cut off from the outside world, and supplies are starting to run out. Roads are blocked by collapsed mountainsides, and the airport's runway is ruptured. The Governor, Philip Undialu, says helicopters have managed to ferry some urgent supplies and carry out assessments for most of the province, but they need bulk supplies.
We have a serious issue with the road blockage. Landslips are preventing us from bringing fuel supplies, food and medicine from Lae and Mount Hagen down to Tari. If the road is not cleared at least within the next 2 or 3 days, then we'll have a serious problem.
From the flattened provincial capital of Tari, where hundreds of residents are sleeping outdoors or in tents, Mr Undialu says crews are working on the main highway to Mendi and the airport runway, and he hopes a supply line will be restored by the middle of the week. But the earth keeps rolling. 3 aftershocks stronger than magnitude 5 shook the region on Monday, including a quake measured at magnitude 6. Mr Undialu says that quake may have added to the devastation at Mount Bosavi, which is closest to the epicentre of last week's quake.
We just got a call from one of the remotest locations, Mount Bosavi. The president of that local level government area called us that an additional 10 people died last night, so we will visit ourselves and confirm.
Both New Zealand and Australia have sent aircraft with aid supplies, and aid agencies and PNG troops are slowly fanning out across the affected area. The national government has so far promised more than $140 million for the response, but the Southern Highlands Administrator, Thomas Elu, says he's yet to see it.
To this point, we're still yet to get support from the National Disaster Coordinating Centre in Port Moresby, particularly in terms of funding and resourcing.
The earthquake could also hammer PNG's already frail economy, with the region home to the country's main revenue earner, the $19 billion LNG project, which pipes natural gas from Hela to the northern coast. Its owner, ExxonMobil, says there has been damage to its infrastructure, and the project will be closed for at least 8 weeks. This is Jamie Tahana.
Police are examining CCTV footage after a man was attacked and later died outside a Flaxmere pub. The man was found outside the Flax Bar and Eatery at 10:30 last night, but died soon after following what the police are describing as serious injuries. Police are treating his death as a homicide. Our Hawke's Bay reporter, Anusha Bradley, has more.
A large cordon has been set up around the pub, locally known as the Flaxmere Tavern, and the surrounding area. The bar is next to the community centre and pool and across the road from the Flaxmere police station. 2 large evidence tents have been erected on a grassed area next to the bar. Detective Senior Sergeant Martin James from the Hawke's Bay CIB says they know who the man is, but have yet to notify his family.
10:30 last night, Hawke's Bay Police received a phone call from a member of the public alerting us to a person injured in the back of the tavern in Flaxmere on Swansea Road. Emergency services responded to that phone call, and upon their arrival this person had passed away.
Police won't reveal any more details about the man's injuries other than to say they are serious. 25 police staff are involved in the homicide investigation, and they're considering the possibility more than one person may have been involved in the attack. Mr James says there are several areas and items of interest within the cordon that are being investigated, and he's confident an examination of CCTV footage will yield some clues.
I would suggest that as the investigation progresses this week, we will have an idea who these people are.
Have you had members of the public come forward to tell you information?
We have had some information come forward this afternoon, and we're just working through that as we speak.
The pub is owned by Masterton-based Trust House Group. Its chief executive Alan Pollard says the bar staff do not believe the man had been in the Flax that evening.
The pub was actually closed. We closed about 8:30.
And really, nothing untoward happened. In fact, it was probably quieter than usual for a Sunday. Our condolences go out to the victim's family. It's actually quite a shock. I mean, Flaxmere has been doing a lot of good things of late.
Directly opposite the bar is a row of pensioner flats. Residents there were surprised to hear of the death. One neighbour, Moewakau Henepare, says she heard nothing at all.
I had TV on and it's not all that loud, but I truly did not hear nothing.
One of your neighbours said sometimes there are fights at that pub. Have you heard, bad behaviour or fights?
Well,
Never?
Let me be honest with you. Some people may assume that. Really, there has never ever been. Yeah, we have some little, but it's not an ongoing thing.
The police say there's no risk to the public at this stage, but are asking the Flaxmere community to remain vigilant. Anyone who saw or heard anything between 10 and 11 last night are being asked to contact the police. In Flaxmere, Anusha Bradley.
Vegetable growers are losing money hand over fist to the tune of $100,000 a week in some cases as the wet and humid weather rots crops and drives prices up. Nationwide, vegetables such as cauliflower have jumped up to $10 a head, more than double the usual cost. That's right, $10 for one cauliflower. Eva Corlett reports.
I mean, that's going to be okay, but you can sort of see what, all these leaves are sort of starting to turn here, and then because they're wrapped around the cauliflower like that, they're just going to damage the nice white part pretty quickly.
That's Karen Hari, whose family has owned RC Hari Growers for 80 years. And in terms of size, is that smaller than usual?
Oh yeah, that's quite small, yeah. But then, see, once it gets to size, then you're sort of getting, you can see the rot marks and the dried up leaves around the head there.
And so for this crop that we're standing in at the moment, how much of it would have been affected?
Oh, I mean, so this whole paddock has been, but in terms of that first half there that you can see, it would have been more than 80% loss.
This year, a period of relentless humidity over 2 weeks has meant his crops have become damp and rotten. With cauliflower at up to $10 a head and other vegetables not far behind, there is nothing Mr Hari can do but incur the losses. Mr Hari says the retail price doesn't necessarily cover the costs, and it's unlikely the cauliflower crop broke even this season. And there aren't many options when it comes to protecting the crops.
It's gutting. Just as we were driving in, and I was looking at these cauliflower, and you can just see visually the amount of brown across what should be a really green crop, and that's really demoralising.
And so, I mean, is there anything that anyone can do in order to help growers when they're in this type of position?
Buy our vegetables in the shops.
And I mean, I guess a lot of customers are going to be going into those supermarkets. They see the $10 price tag for a cauliflower, and they're just going to go, no.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's understandable. I've got family who have been texting me exactly the same thing. They go to the farmers markets and they're seeing $8 or $9 cauliflower and $5 or $6 broccoli, and you have to just shrug your shoulders and say sorry.
Customers at Auckland supermarkets told RNZ's Sophia Duckle-Jones that they will have to grin and bear the high prices.
You still got to eat. Yeah. What are you going to have otherwise?
So you just got to put up with it.
That's the matter. And the growers have got to eat, and they've lost crop, and so just worked its way through.
Yeah, the fresh vegetables, their prices are increasing quite heavily. Yeah.
And does that stop you from buying them?
Sometimes, because you have to limit your stock then. Instead of, if you're going to buy 4, so you will go, okay, let's just have like 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely you cut down your supply.
The Chief Executive of Horticulture New Zealand, Mike Chapman, says growers are losing up to $100,000 a week due to the conditions. He says that they are hoping for steady weather to get produce back on track.
Those prices don't get back to the grower because the growers lost production, and by losing production is losing money, and then that affects the rural communities where people come from who work for the growers. So it's not a good story at all. So we're very desperate to get things back to normal.
Mr Chapman says he would like to see better protective measures in place for growers against the weather.
Talk to some of the older growers and they say, yeah, they can remember seasons a bit like this. But, we seem to be getting more and more of these climatic events, and that really puts a real emphasis on doing something about this before it's too late.
Mike Chapman says the government can create national policy statements under the Resource Management Act to protect soils and growing areas. I tāmaki makoro mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi ko Eva Colette, tēnei.
Feedback. Hi, John. We are one of those re-repair people who are in the vortex of dysfunction with EQC. When we did an OIA, we discovered that 80 different people inside EQC have been involved with our house with no result. Can you actually believe that? We've spent 30k of our own money so far with no result. I don't want to believe that. There is no incentive for EQC to resolve these issues even after 7 years. Fortunately, I'm defiant and will battle relentlessly to get it sorted, says Simon.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Bat and aho. Otago University's student law camp has been cancelled after complaints about excessive drinking, nudity and jelly wrestling in previous camps. The university's Humanities Pro-Vice-Chancellor Tony Ballantyne says he's met with the Student Law Society this afternoon and told them he was withdrawing support for the camp planned for this weekend. He says as a result the society decided to cancel the camp, which was a social event for second-year students. Professor Ballantyne says due to the concerns raised in the past 48 hours, the university believes a rethink and redesign of the event is required. The Prime Minister says the main challenge for Pacific countries is to manage their level of debt. On day one of her Pacific mission in Samoa, Jacinda Ardern talked about resilience in dealing with natural disasters. She and the Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, also faced questions about China's influence. China has helped build the Samoan airport, hospital and sporting grounds through a loan. Ms Ardern says the presence of other countries in the region is nothing new.
It's fair to say that that has increased over the years. What we can do as New Zealand, as members of the Pacific, is make sure that we're doing our part to support and work alongside our Pacific neighbours as they tackle some of the big challenges that they face here. That's our responsibility, and that's something we can take charge of.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. Jordan Williams' defamation case against the former Conservative Party leader Colin Craig will be heading back to court, but it won't be a full retrial. In a judgment issued today, the Court of Appeal has reinstated a High Court jury's verdict that Mr Craig defamed Mr Williams at a news conference and in a leaflet distributed to 1.6 million households around the country in July 2015. But there'll be a retrial on the amount the jury awarded Mr Williams in damages. The jury awarded almost $1.3 million in damages to Mr Williams, the highest ever amount in a New Zealand defamation case. But the Court of Appeal agreed the amount was excessive and must be set aside. A High Court murder trial has been told a text feud of habitual insults escalated into the death of a Nelson man almost 2 years ago. John Murray Morton was found dead on the deck of a boat moored in the Nelson Haven beside State Highway 6 in August 2016. Martin Grant Price was later arrested and charged with murder. He's denied the charge. The Crown Prosecutor Jackson Webber told the court today that the victim had met a violent death.
He used at least a knife and his booted feet. The knife was one with a blade that was long enough to penetrate some 15 centimetres deep into Mr Morton's body.
Mr Webber described the build-up to Mr Morton's death as exchanges of juvenile schoolyard abuse. The film The Shape of Water has taken out Best Picture at the Oscars. Frances McDormand has won her second Oscar for Best Actress for her role in the Three Billboards film. Gary Oldman won his first actor for his performance as British wartime leader Winston Churchill in Darkest Hour in today's awards ceremony in Hollywood. Guillermo del Toro won for Best Director for The Shape of Water. It's his first win. This Is Me, sung by Keala Settle, the American singer of Maori descent, lost out on Best Original Song to Mexico. Also representing New Zealand and Hollywood was Weta Digital, but it too lost out. It was nominated for Best Visual Effects for its work on War of the Planet of the Apes and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. The winner was Blade Runner 2049. The police in Huntly are concerned for a man who went into the Waikato River just after midnight on Friday while fleeing from officers. The man was driving a Mazda 323 before the chase ended near the Tainui Bridge, where he jumped into the water. They say he was last seen swimming in the river before disappearing from view. A helicopter and boat search was carried out, but there was no sign of the man. The police haven't been able to establish who he is or if he was able to get out of the river. They want to hear from anyone who has information about the man and whether he is safe. Italy looks set to have a hung parliament as counting continues in the national elections. Initial projections have the former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi's centre-right coalition winning most seats in the lower house of Parliament. No grouping has won an outright majority, but officials from the anti-establishment Five Star Party say they're likely to be part of the next government. The ABC's Steve Kinane reports.
It's predicted Five Star, which was formed by comedian Beppe Grillo less than 9 years ago, will win the most votes. However, the party, led by 31-year-old Luigi Di Maio, does not look like it has secured enough votes to form government on its own. Five Star's officials have previously said the movement would not be part of any coalition, but the party may have to rethink that promise to satisfy its supporters. The election has been a disaster for the mainstream parties, with populist parties on track to win close to 50% of the vote.
Steve Kinane in Rome. It's 6:05. Sport, the Breakers must win tonight or their NBL basketball season is over. The New Zealanders trail Melbourne United 1-0 in their best-of-3 semi-final series and a loss in Auckland, and it's bye-bye Breakers. 3 times Commonwealth Games medalist Nick Willis says while he's disappointed to miss the Gold Coast Games, he knows he's had a good run at previous games. A stress fracture in his lower leg has forced Willis to withdraw from the Games. Willis says he's been fortunate injury-wise during his career and his focus now is the World Champs next year and the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. The New Zealand Warriors veteran Simon Mannering has been ruled out of the NRL season opener this Saturday against South Sydney with a shoulder injury. The 31-year-old may be out for up to a month. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our sports correspondent Peter Lamp is seeing red over Super Rugby's new yellow card system. We have a window on the world of Shakriya Baraksain, Afghanistan's ambassador to Norway. And deep in the Southern Ocean, Dr. Dave Bowden speaks to us via satellite phone from the NIWA research ship the Tangaroa, where there's a distinct lack of icebergs.
And on Lately at 10, we're live and we'll be keeping you up to date with the world, talking to some of the people who have made the news or are just worth talking to. That's Lately with Karen Hay on Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow for all of the North Island apart from Wellington. Mostly fine, however isolated afternoon and evening showers, mainly inland, some heavy and possibly thundery. For Wellington, cloudy periods, a few showers tomorrow morning, turning to light rain later. Nelson, Buller and Marlborough, excluding the Kaikoura coast, mostly fine. Isolated showers mainly inland, some heavy and possibly thundery during the afternoons and evenings. Showers becoming widespread later tomorrow. Kaikoura coast and Canterbury, fine spells and isolated showers, but widespread rain tomorrow, briefly heavy, easing later. Otago and Southland, also Westland, isolated showers, possibly heavy about eastern Otago this afternoon. Widespread rain spreading from the south tomorrow, then clearing later. Fiordland, scattered showers spreading north overnight, clearing later tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy. Rain developing tonight, easing to a few showers later tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. National's EQC spokesperson believes the Earthquake Commission should sue Fletcher Building if there's compelling evidence the contractor was responsible for a large number of post-earthquake repairs in Christchurch that went up to scratch. Earlier in the programme, we heard from a couple who bought a house in Christchurch post-quake for $350,000, believing it had been repaired by EQC, that's what the paperwork said, only to discover it hadn't, and the re-repairs will cost them $380,000, more than they originally paid for the home. Stuart Smith, who told us he'd received a handover briefing from his predecessor Jerry Brownlee, the man who held the portfolio for 6 years after the earthquakes, says a case can be made for Fletcher Building assuming liability. If that happens, it would be a total departure from previous advice to EQC that the contract they signed with Fletcher's exempted the company from liability for substandard repairs. Stuart Smith was reacting to the number of homeowners in Christchurch who are only now finding out the extent of the damage to their properties. It was an unprecedented event, he says. Yes, absolutely. But for this to still be happening 7 years on?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing to say is that, I have great sympathy for those people, and it's something that shouldn't have happened. However, it has, and we have to deal with what's in front of us. Really, we were unprepared for what happened in front of us, and such a big number of claims that were coming the way of EQC and the insurance industry, which we didn't really have under the Act. The Act only required EQC to make a cash payment to those people who had damaged homes. However, had that just happened on its own, the likely effect of that would have been probably a situation far worse than we have today. The issue and the way that it was decided to deal with that was to do a managed repair program, and so that's what happened. Fletcher's managed that, and through their contractors, and as we know, some of those repairs were not up to standard, and that's what we are talking about now.
What do you make of those initial assessments? And your point is absolutely central to all of this. It was such a big event. And prior to the Christchurch earthquakes in 2011, there was, I think, 20 permanent staff at EQC. 180,000 rapid assessments were done in the 2 months after the earthquakes. What do you make of the quality of some of that work?
Well, clearly some of it wasn't up to standard. I mean, I'd have to admit I was nervous about it at the time. Now, I didn't have first-hand experience with those assessments, but my parents had an EQC assessment on their house done by someone who was a retired policeman, I believe. Now, I've got nothing against retired policemen, but unless they have building or an insurance assessment experience, it does make me a little nervous. Well, it did make me nervous at the time.
What needs to happen to those people who, through no fault of their own, particularly when there is EQC paperwork telling them the house they are about to buy is fine, have bought a house that isn't fine? What happens now?
Well, there are avenues through the courts, and that's where it's going to be now. The liability will lie with Fletcher's and how they recover that from their contractors. If they do, that will be over to them.
The liability doesn't lie with Fletcher's, though, does it? Because Fletcher's wouldn't actually take on the role of effectively managing the Canterbury home repair program if the liability lay with them.
Well, I believe it does. That's my understanding. So EQC had an arrangement with for the managed repairs through Fletcher's, and so they hired them to do work. If it's not up to standard and didn't meet what was paid for, then there's recourse through the courts for that.
I'm looking at the Auditor General's report that says none of the bidders for the project management services were willing to accept liability for substandard repair work. In other words, actually, ultimately, the buck stops with EQC in contractual terms.
Yeah, well, look, I'm not a lawyer. I assume that this will end up in court, and those things will be sorted out in the courts. But if you contract anyone to do something and they don't meet their contractual obligation, then whether they've accepted liability or not, the courts will assign liability and recover the costs.
So if it becomes apparent that there is an enormous amount of substandard repair work, a problematic amount of it, would you expect EQC to pursue Fletcher's in court?
Absolutely.
Which seemed to be a radical change of National's position on this. We called Fletcher's to see what their response to that was. Remember, none of this action is taking place. And in fact, we asked EQC about it last week and they said they would not be pursuing Fletcher's in court. Fletcher's were once again not available for comment. You've been available for comment though, by golly. You will have heard Stuart Smith say his parents had a retired police officer inspect their home after the earthquakes. Well, so did this person who texted in. The EQC inspector who knocked on my door after the February 2011 2011 quake, proudly proclaimed he was, quote, raking it in New Zealand, getting paid $75 per hour plus free accommodation and a per diem. He was a retired Aussie policeman in New Zealand for the first time on a 6-week contract. My heart sank as he did his visual appraisal. Thanks for continuing with coverage of EQC issues. We are hearing from lots of people telling us, as one person who texted in described it, you are talking about our nightmare. It's 40 minutes past 6. The government is attempting to hit the ground running with its new plan to invest more in the Pacific, announcing almost $10 million to tackling climate change and boosting the economy in Samoa in the first instance. The so-called Pacific Reset was unveiled by the Foreign Minister Winston Peters last week and aims to re-establish New Zealand's position in the region in the face of an increasingly influential China. Lots of concessionary money going into the Pacific, lots of loans that don't have to be repaid in a hurry and probably have no likelihood of ever being repaid. It's Jacinda Ardern's first trip to the Pacific as Prime Minister. She arrived in Samoa today with Mr Peters and a delegation of business leaders and MPs for the first stop of the annual Pacific mission trip. Ms Ardern was asked by reporters in Apia whether she was concerned about China's increasing influence in the Pacific.
There are a number of challenges facing the Pacific, be it resilience against climate change and severe weather events, trans-Tasman organised crime, everything from unemployment amongst young people, a number of challenges. Ensuring that they're equipped to deal with those challenges often means, yes, seeking grant and loan opportunities. As the Prime Minister of Samoa pointed out this morning, what's important from their perspective is managing those debt levels and servicing those debt levels, and each Pacific Island nation will have their own plan on how they do that.
Jacinda Ardern in Apia. Winston Peters reiterated his point that New Zealand and Australia need to step up in the Pacific.
Well, there's no doubt that the most beneficial influences in the Pacific are New Zealand and Australia, and we mean to ensure that our influence does not diminish but rather increases, and for the sound and valid reasons that are more important today than they ever have been.
Winston Peters. Jacinda Ardern also announced New Zealand is contributing $6.5 million to boost employment and help women and young people get into small businesses in Samoa.
So we've already supported the work that the Chamber of Commerce in particular have been doing in the area of microfinancing and supporting young people and women in business. So that goes to technical assistance, it goes to mentoring, the kinds of things that will help those groups establish businesses that are sustainable and have a long-term effect on the economy. My understanding that is that that particular project which we're looking to support with this boost in funding has already contributed significantly and measurably to the GDP of Samoa. So we want to see more of that.
Jacinda Ardern, who heads to Niue tomorrow, where her father is the High Commissioner. Auckland commuters can breathe a sigh of relief with peak time train services expected to return to normal tomorrow after a week of industrial action. The action by the Rail and Maritime Transport Union coincided with students starting university, a period that usually leads to heavy traffic on Auckland roads. Our reporter Jessie Chang filed this report, starting with her own commute this morning on the first official week of so-called March Madness.
My daily trip into Auckland City involves driving to Papua, catching the train and then walking up to the RNZ office from Britomart. So, like other commuters, I was bracing myself for March Madness this morning.
Traffic conditions haven't been terrible, I must say. I was expecting it to be much worse.
There are no seats on the train when it arrives at the Papua station, and everyone is squeezing in together as we pick up more passengers from Glen Innes, Meadowbank and then Orake. That's due to industrial action, which means trains are running every 20 minutes in peak time instead of every 10 minutes. Transdev and Auckland Transport wanted to move to driver-only trains, with train officers employed to go on and off between stations to manage problems. But the Rail and Maritime Transport Union argued that would make it unsafe for passengers. Speaking to other commuters, it's clear that they are keen for services to go back to normal. This man says it already takes him an hour to get into the city every day without disruptions.
I mean, because currently I think the transport system is actually quite inadequate in terms of sort of getting people into the city on time to go to work. Even people living out on the, the periphery of the city, getting into work.
But things are looking up for commuters frustrated by the reduced train schedule after Transdev and the union came to an agreement today. The union's organiser John Kerr says he couldn't be more happy.
We're pleased that both Transdev and AT have agreed to enter into a process where everybody looks at that afresh and with an open mind, and we work together constructively and cooperatively towards solutions that are going to be in the interest of the travelling public.
Mr Kerr says the union will now be talking to members about the deal, which is subject to ratification. He says the details of the agreement should be made public afterwards. Auckland Transport says peak time trains should be running normally by tomorrow morning. Itamaki Makoto for Checkpoint, Kōrisi Chang TNA.
Staying in Auckland, the man accused of murdering his girlfriend had a history of abusing her, a court has heard. Turiarangi Tai is on trial at the High Court in Auckland, where he's denied murdering Chosen Koroheke, but admitted illegally having the gun that killed her. Laura Tupou has been at court and filed this report and a warning some listeners may find the content of Laura's report disturbing.
Chosen Koroheke, a 22-year-old mother of two, was shot and killed in her Pakaranga home last April. At the time, the police were searching for her boyfriend, Turiarangi Tai, who, after nearly 2 weeks, handed himself in. Today, the Crown Prosecutor Mark Williams opened the Crown's case, alleging Mr Tai deliberately shot Ms Koroheke with a 12-gauge double-barrelled shotgun.
He loaded the firearm, disengaged the safety catch, put his finger inside the trigger guard on the shotgun and deliberately pulled the trigger and fired the shotgun at Chosen with a clear intention to kill her, or at the very least to injure her, and being reckless of whether she died or not.
Mr Williams said Mr Tai and Ms Koroheke had a short relationship, but it wasn't the first time Mr Tai had been violent towards Ms Koroheke. There was an incident a week earlier.
And it was on this occasion that the Crown say that Mr Tai had assaulted Chosen in the head with a rock. He had also stabbed her on another occasion in the month prior to that. And indeed, not only was there physical violence, but he had also threatened to shoot her before.
The Crown Prosecutor, Mark Williams, said earlier that day Mr Tai showed Ms Koroheke's brother and his then-girlfriend an unloaded shotgun. Mr Williams told the jury Mr Tai and Ms Koroheke had been arguing that day, and Mr Tai later packed up his car, saying he was leaving, which wasn't unusual. He asked Ms Koroheke for petrol money, but she said no. He then drove up the long driveway, but turned around and drove back to the house. He came inside armed with the shotgun. Mr Williams says at the time Ms Koroheke and her brother's then-girlfriend were in her brother's room. He says Mr Tai forced his way into the bedroom with the loaded shotgun, aimed it at Ms Koroheke's head, hit her on the head with the barrel, and then aimed it at the right side of her body.
And with one hand on the barrel and an angry look on his face, swearing at Chosen, you pulled the trigger and shot her once in the side of the abdomen at close range, somewhere between 10 and 50 centimetres away.
Mr Williams says it was only a matter of time until she died at her home. He says Ms Koroheke's brother and girlfriend phoned the ambulance, but Mr Tai drove off before they arrived. He says he went to the petrol station to buy petrol, drinks, smokes and a lighter using Ms Koroheke's debit card. The Crown argues Mr Tai killed Ms Koroheke out of anger. A woman with name suppression is also on trial and has denied a charge relating to helping Mr Tai after the murder. The trial is set down for 4 weeks, with the defence expected to start tomorrow. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Laura Tupou aho.
One of New Zealand's leading medal hopes for the Commonwealth Games, middle distance runner Nick Willis, has been forced to pull out due to a stress fracture in his lower leg. Willis has won 3 Commonwealth Games medals and 2 Olympic medals, and he told sports editor Stephen Hewson he was looking forward to competing in Australia.
Back last year, we thought this was a really awesome opportunity to return back to where it all sort of started, 2006 in Melbourne in Australia, where my international career started. I got to get on top of the podium and hear the national anthem, and I think inspire a lot of the guys now that are coming through, the Robertson twins and Hamish Carlson and Julian Matthews, and had a chance to do the same again at these Commonwealth Games. So I put in a lot of miles, a lot of hard work, 160k weeks, writing was on the wall 2 weeks ago when I sort of missed my first target, where I sort of progressed to the next phase of cross-training. I still had a little bit of pain in my legs, so I knew getting out to full weight running was going to be a stretch. So the decision's really been made for me by the pain, by the inability to start running yet. I've still got a couple more weeks before that's a reality.
So the frustration, or how frustrating is it, or do you go, actually, I've had a pretty good run injury-wise, and I've been quite fortunate?
It's a bit of both. It's still very healthy to go through a grieving process when you have a disappointment, an injury, or whatever it is. So sort of a 48-hour period where I sort of dealt with all of that. Then at the same time, it made it much easier to move on from that, to think I won 3 Commonwealth medals, a couple of Olympic medals. I've had very few injuries that have held me back for years, so I've had a very good run of it. So I can't really complain.
So what do you do now? What's your calendar going to look like for the rest of the year?
Well, sure, it's disappointing not to go to the games, but when the final decision was made by my coach, it was actually a big relief, because I wasn't able to make that decision myself. You know, I would do whatever I could to try and get on that start line, but I deep down knew it was the right decision, and in the end, I couldn't have, wasn't even an option.
Nick Willis talking to Stephen Hewson. The Shape of Water has been the big winner at the 90th Academy Awards. The movie about a mute cleaning woman who falls in love with a strange river creature has gone into the ceremony with a leading 13 Oscar nominations and won 4 of them, including Best Picture. The Oscar ceremony in Los Angeles was politically charged, including jokes about Donald Trump and support for immigration. Graham Acton with the latest.
Lights, camera, action. It's Oscars night in LA and the stars are out to shine. Jimmy Kimmel returned to the stage for his second consecutive year as the host and wasted little time addressing the media mogul elephant in the room.
Here's how clueless Hollywood is about women. We made a movie called What Women Want, and it starred Mel Gibson. Kind of all you need to know. The Academy, as you're no doubt aware, took action last year to expel Harvey Weinstein from their ranks. There were a lot of great nominees, but Harvey deserved it the most. And, oh, that's nice. That's very sweet. So I'm sure he'll appreciate that applause. But what happened with Harvey and what's happening all over was long overdue. We can't let bad behavior slide anymore. The world is watching us.
Early awards included Sam Rockwell for the Best Supporting Actor in 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, and Alison Janney for her Best Supporting Actress role in I, Tonya, the story of Olympic ice skater Tonya Harding. Jordan Peele's political thriller Get Out has placed him in the Oscar history books, crowned as winner in the Best Original Screenplay race, making him the first black screenwriter to receive the honour.
This means so much to me. I stopped writing this movie about 20 times because I thought it was impossible. I thought it wasn't going to work. I thought no one would ever make this movie. But I kept coming back to it because I knew if someone let me make this movie, that people would hear it and people would see it. So I want to dedicate this to all the people who raised my voice and let me make this movie.
Frontrunner The Shape of Water led the pack this year, a detailed and atmospheric account of a mute woman who falls in love with a sea monster kept at a secret government lab.
I can either save him or let him die.
Don't do this, Eliza. Don't do this.
I'm going to be synchronizing our watches just like they do in the movies.
Oh, woman, we gonna burn in hell.
Director Guillermo del Toro picked up the award for Best Director and made a point about the contribution immigrants bring to the US film industry.
In 2014, they came to listen to a mad pitch with some drawings and the story and a maquette, and they believed that a fairy tale about an amphibian god and a mute woman and done in the style of Douglas Sirk and a musical and a thriller was a sure bet.
Best Actor went to Gary Oldman for his intense portrayal of Winston Churchill in Darkest Hour.
Even though many old and famous states have fallen into the grip of the Nazi rule, we shall defend our island, whatever the cost.
Oldman was the frontrunner for the Best Actor Oscars after sweeping awards season with prizes at the Golden Globes, the Screen Actors Guild, and from numerous film critics.
My deepest thanks to the Academy and its members for this glorious prize. I owe this and so much more to so many. I've lived in America for the longest time, and I am deeply grateful to her for the loves and the friendships I have made and the many wonderful gifts it has given me.
Best Actress went to Frances McDormand for her portrayal of an angry woman seeking justice in the dark comedy 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri.
You ain't trying to make me believe in reincarnation or something, are you? Because you're pretty, but you ain't her. She got killed. Now she's dead forever. I do thank you for coming, though.
Okay. So I'm hyperventilating a little bit. If I fall over, pick me up because I've got some things to say. We are a bunch of hooligans and anarchists, but we do clean up nice. And now I want to get some perspective. If I may be so honored to have all the female nominees in every category stand with me in this room tonight. The actors. Meryl, if you do it, everybody else will. Come on. Okay, look around, everybody. Look around, ladies and gentlemen, because we all have stories to tell and projects we need financed.
Frances McDormand topped off a year of diversity at the awards, saluting the Me Too movement against sexual harassment and urging underrepresented artists to seize the momentum. This is Graham Acton.
And Graham, and the Oscars end Checkpoint for tonight. Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your company. Have a lovely evening. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. This weekend's Otago University Law Students' Camp has been cancelled after the Humanities Pro-Vice-Chancellor withdrew support. The Court of Appeal says the amount awarded to Jordan Williams in his defamation case against the former Conservative Party leader Colin Craig was excessive. On day one of her Pacific mission in Samoa, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the main challenge for countries in the region is to manage their level of debt. Businesses in Golden Bay say they're suffering after the Cyclone Gita storm closed the region's only access road, and its partial reopening is still not helping. And the fantasy film The Shape of Water has won Best Picture at today's Oscar ceremony, with its director Guillermo del Toro also taking home the Best Director award. Our next news and weather is at 7. If you think RNZ has breached formal standards either on air